Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us on day 2 of the 9th Annual Mayor's Conference on Entrepreneurship. Today, we will again break out into our groups to do more work on implementing the programs, policies, or practices you have selected. But before we do that, we are going to have a couple speakers talk about how we might use this moment of social upheaval to achieve systemic change. Change that will make our economy more inclusive of all communities and therefore more resilient. And first to talk about that is Philip Gaskin, the Vice President of Entrepreneurship at the Kauffman Foundation, my boss. Philip is an experienced executive, a social entrepreneur, a political organizer, and an airplane aficionado. But most importantly, Philip cares deeply. He cares for the person in front of him. Not the person he wishes they were, the person they might be, but the person they are. Philip deals in empathy and has an intuitive understanding of how we are all connected in our shared experiences. Please help me in welcoming Philip Gaskin, the Vice President of Entrepreneurship. Philip.
Evan, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here and be here with everyone. Thanks very much.
Thank you. You know, it's great being here with you. I remember, 5 years ago, your first Mayor's Conference on Entrepreneurship in Florida and how far we've come. But, like I said in the intro, Philip, you do have some political experience. You were an organizer in Philadelphia, and I know you could speak to some of these issues that the mayors are facing today. If you had anything to say to the mayors, what would it be?
Thanks, Evan, for that. I'd say first, know that we see you. It's this pandemic has created unparalleled economic crisis, and it's going to be impacting us for years to come. And we see it in the daily moment now. Things being hit so hard. In New York City just announced week-long furlough for mayoral staff, and this time in history has shown us that we're all interconnected, and through doing that community organizing, political work, and other work in entrepreneurial ecosystems, just understanding is how interconnected we are, and we have to help one another. And the other thing I'd say is, so we see you, but we're also here to help you. And throughout the conference, we're going to continue talking about, we did it yesterday, we'll continue to today, talking about metrics and innovative policies and ways you can take action to maintain viable and sustainable ecosystems for entrepreneurial communities, to strengthen those entrepreneurial communities. So not only the communities, but the entrepreneurs and everyone else in the communities can survive and flourish.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So, like I said earlier, this is our 9th year, and we've had the band together for a while now, and I guess we've changed a lot, and you've driven a lot of that change and pushed us to be better, and that's thank you for that leadership. But I guess what excites you about this year? What have you seen this year that you would really like the mayors to know? I think gets you excited.
Yeah, I'm just so thankful about the commitment, the commitment to the process. It has a lot of potential. Mayors committing, everyone committing to take away a commitment, a policy, program, or practice that can be instituted in a community. And overall, the foundation, what we're trying to do is trying to work with organizations that have platforms that we, as I say, we move from trying to do it all to cause it to happen. And that's really important. And there's a deep desire in our foundation, and I think philanthropy in general, to scale. But I think scale can look different for different organizations in different ways. But we can achieve a lot of scale in communities if we come together and work together, et cetera. So you'll hear me repeating that theme, as I have been since April, talking about interdependence and interconnectedness.
Yeah, no, and I think that's exactly right. And you bringing that perspective as vice president has been very helpful, both in my work, but also in how we, engage policymakers across many different regions and many different types of towns and cities. And I think it's going to really, really help. Yeah. Another thing that you do that I always appreciate is you frame things in sort of a very simple, way of thinking of it, and it helps us execute, which is there's a choice, there's a challenge, and there's an outcome. And this is directly from your organizing days, and I use it all the time, and it's been very helpful. You know, starting with the choice, what do you think the choice we are facing in this moment is? What choice are we confronted with?
You know, I'd say do we stay the same and suffer, or do we change, work together, and repair broken systems? Because this is what we're talking about, is systems change. And, all of us have to understand that we all play a role in this. And, regardless of perspective, we have to find a way to work together. And we have a tendency just as a nation, really, to rally around a crisis, come together. But then we also have this tendency to fall back apart. So whether it's 9/11, whether it's a Great Recession, what have you, we come together, work together. But then we tend to relax, and maybe we look at certain economic indicators or what have you. We tend to relax, we fall back apart. When you fall back apart, that's when the inequities just continue to grow, right? And but the attention on them tends to lose focus. And so, my drive and what wakes me up every morning when I get out of bed still just charged with is, understanding my experience as a child growing up. I'm a product of that inequitable system in a number of different ways, and just being here to, help make the change and move things forward. But the choice is stark. When people sometimes say to me, well, what do we look like in 5 years? I say, well, we look 5 years worse than today if we don't change, right? And so it's very clear. So that's what I'd say our choices.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And then of course, what our choice is, but we also, I think part of that is part of your framework is we have an outcome that we're trying to achieve too. Yeah. And that helps us say, okay, we've got this choice, but we can go either way, but we need to know what we're working towards. And so I guess, what is the outcome of that choice? Where should we be going?
I would say, in some respects, back to where we were. We have to repair back and get to as much equity as we can. Not that we were at equity, don't get me wrong, but if we all come together and work out our differences, imagine the day when people in rural America, entrepreneurs of color, women, those with a credit score just a few points too low, who can't get the bank loan and all that other stuff, through some systemic issues, right? Everyone is seen as viable. Everyone can play. Everyone has that, as I say, equal seat at the front table. Everyone's heard. Everyone's included, because that's a pathway to economic independence. Because what we're talking about, it's the word economic again, obviously. Well, what we're talking about is the viability and sustainability of the U.S. economy, right? And it's just following the data that shows where we're going to be in a number of years. And so what we're talking about is systems change. It needs to be transformational. And I think the last few months has shown us just how transformational it really, really needs to be, looking at the whole system. So outcome, everyone, regardless of who they are, where they're from, has an equal access to opportunity. Economic independence.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, and I think that's really what we've been talking about this whole time. Is there are a lot of lessons that we can pull over if we're talking about racial equity. Racial equity will build muscles and empathy that we can apply to rural communities that have been left behind by the loss of manufacturing jobs, right? Building an understanding of how the systems affect communities and building empathy for those communities, that muscle of empathy and understanding and systems change applies. Now, the policies might be different for racial equity, and the policies might be different for rural communities, but the position of there is a system that is promulgating this negative outcome that we need to take a few steps back and deal with, that's a good practice to get into. And I think that we can get into that practice here, and the mayors understand that and sit at an important place in that system. So thank you for that. That's fantastic. Yeah. Where are we headed? What advice, as we move forward from not just this day and this conference, but as we implement these programs and practices, but also as a community, as a larger community interested in entrepreneurship and recovery, what advice or what pointers or thoughts would you have for all the community leaders we have gathered with us today?
Well, I'll start with saying how I opened. We see you and we hear you. And at Kauffman Foundation, we've sort of had a little head start on this last 3 years. When we pivoted 3.5, 4 years, we pivoted our strategy to a systems change, social justice based strategy. We've been doing that work. So on our entrepreneurship policy work, our entrepreneurship research work, our programmatic work, looking at what are those systemic barriers that get in the way of entrepreneurs starting and growing a business, with a look at underrepresented populations, folks that normally get left behind. And so, here comes the community organizing me again, but it starts at the community level. Economies are local. And so it's from the bottom up, and understanding that local has the power, and all of you. So you mentioned advice, Evan, the things I give some advice is for all of us, just be authentic. Show up, tell your story, learn from other people's stories, engage, get people to talk in each other. We have to listen, listen. I was told not doing community organizing, yet listen 70% of the time and you talk 30% of the time. If you get that skewed, you're not listening and you're not solutioning for people. So be authentic, show up, tell your story. And for all of us, and especially all of you, keep in mind that everyone needs you. Keep in mind your brilliance, keep in mind your resolve. You all bring so much to the conversation, and especially now, everyone's looking up to you. And it's hard, and it's going to be hard right now, but don't let anyone tell you otherwise, that you're doing what you're doing and you're in office for a reason, and we need you all. So thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you, Philip. Yeah, I echo that all the time. And a very, very well-worn quote from Mayor LaGuardia of New York is, there's no Republican or Democrat way to pick up the trash. We're all here to kind of just, help out communities. And I think I love working with the mayors and I love working with community leaders, because in the end, we all live with the choices, right? We live in the communities where we're making choices. Yeah. And we are digging in for solutions. And a lot of the, I think, conversation that kind of drives us apart gets eliminated at the local level, because in the end, everybody's in this together in a very real way. And the mayors are absolutely crucial in that. And so we're appreciative of all different folks coming in and just digging in and solutioning together.
Yeah, we know. We all know how to work very, very hard and successfully independently. Now it's all about interdependence. You're absolutely right. Yep. And it's we can do it. Let's go.
I agree. Thank you, Philip. All right. Well, we'll talk later. I'm sure we'll catch up. It was nice seeing you.
Yeah, appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate you. Thank you, Philip.
All right.
Philip Gaskin, everybody, thank you so much. But now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Andre Perry. Dr. Perry is a fellow at the Metropolitan Policy Program at the Brookings Institute. He is a scholar in resident at the American University and a columnist for the Hechinger Report. He is an author of a new book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities, which is currently available wherever books are sold. But you can read all of that in his bio. I met Dr. Perry, I was lucky enough to meet him in person at a Ford Foundation event where we were adapting this commitment model to another field of interest, the future of work. And even in that room full of exemplary people, Dr. Perry stood out as willing to speak the truth, even if it was uncomfortable or contrarian. And when I read Dr. Perry's book, I could hear his voice and feel his pain, but I could also hear his hope. And I know you all, if you're willing to listen and connect, he will connect with you in the same way. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Andre Perry. He's a brilliant speaker, and he will get us into the weeds. Pardon me?
The stream is frozen.
Okay. So yep. Well, we'll get him on here in a second. Of course, it's live now. I've proven that we are doing this live because we were having a bit of an issue with Dr. Perry's stream. So what we're going to do is Dr. Perry is going to present his discussion about entrepreneurship and how it lays over different policy issues, particularly at the local level. And the interesting thing about Dr. Perry's perspective is, much like Philip, he intermixes that with his own personal story. So Dr. Perry has done a ton of research on how local policies, how wealth building policies, and how different systems have affected black wealth creation in this country over the history of this country. And he interjects his own personal story to bring color and meaning to it, and it's a really powerful perspective. So one of the things that I want you all to prepare for is, as Dr. Perry is presenting, is one, prepare questions, thoughts. We're here to have an engaged conversation, and we want to make sure that you all are getting your questions answered. And this is a safe space. We want all questions answered, and there isn't a bad question. Dr. Perry is willing to field, and I'm willing to field any question that you might have. But the other thing, too, is we have all sorts of different communities represented here at the Mayor's Conference, and we have different types of leaders. And like I said earlier with conversation with Philip Gaskin, is I believe personally that what we learn in one area of fixing our systems, we can apply to another. And that systems change is a practice and a methodology and a muscle that we learn. And it's based on empathy, and it's based on putting people first. And while the policy might be different depending on what community you lead, or what the makeup of the community is, or where it's located geographically, building a systems mindset and empathy is crucial to this. And I think that's really the point of this conversation, is what can we learn from this area of policies, from racial equity, that we can apply in a community that was left behind by the loss of manufacturing jobs, or a change in an industry, or downsizing of some kind, or outsourcing. Because in reality, it's a community that has been affected by policy and forces outside of its control that we need to intentionally engage in and help. And with that, I would love to introduce Dr. Perry. I think he's available. Dr. Perry, are you there?
I am here. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I'll let you take it from here.
Very good. Good morning. Good morning. Still morning here in Washington, D.C. I'm sitting at American University, where I am a professor here, a scholar in residence here. I'm going to share a screen to start my presentation, and I titled it "Worthy of Investment: The Devaluation of Assets in Black Communities." And a lot of this data can be found in my new book, Know Your Price: Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. There at Brookings, I study majority Black cities. As you can see here, there are a lot of them. There are 1,200, more than 1,200, in fact, concentrated in the South, moving along the Eastern Seaboard. But I also study Black neighborhoods. So wherever there's Black people, I look at the assets within them that can be invested in, that can accelerate economic mobility. I wanted to level set here and start off with some basic statistics. Black people represent about 13% of the population, but only 2.2 of the percent of the businesses with employees. Only 1% of Black business owners were able to attain a loan in their founding year, compared to 7% of white entrepreneurs. Black entrepreneurs are denied bank loans more than twice as often as their white peers. When we do get loans, we get them at higher interest rates. And about half of Black businesses survived the Great Recession, compared to 60% of white-owned firms. And a lot of people know this statistic. When the CARES Act rolled out, only 95% of Black-owned businesses, or 95% of Black-owned businesses did not receive the PPP loan. So I'm going to provide you some context of why that is the case, a reason why that is the case, and also offer some solutions to change these numbers. And my presentation is going to start with a story about housing. And I'm going to start with my own home, where I grew up. This is 1320 Hill Avenue in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania, a small Black majority municipality surrounded on three sides by Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And as the story was told to me, the woman in the upper right-hand corner, her name is Elsie Boyd. I call her Mom. there was a deal made between mom and my maternal grandmother that she would take me when I was born and take me to the house and raise me. And it wasn't, I'm not sure if it was supposed to be for 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, but I eventually stayed in the house till I graduated from high school. And as you can see, she reared about a dozen or so children from around the community. When I was born in 1970, it was on the eve of the economic collapse in Pittsburgh. So lots of people, particularly men, became unemployed, and many could not take care of their children. And so my mom filled a breach when the private sector and government could not provide assistance to families. One of the reasons why that deal was made between my maternal grandmother and mom was this gentleman, my father, was in and out of prison. He became addicted to heroin during that period, and he bounced in and out of prison until he was eventually murdered inside of prison right outside of Detroit. A lot of what I'm about to tell you in regard to housing had a lot to do with it. So in studying assets, it's important to look at housing because housing is connected to so many other policy levers. In particular, when it comes to entrepreneurialism, most people start their businesses using the equity in their homes. So I began to look at home prices in Black majority neighborhoods and compare them to white majority neighborhoods. And as you can see on this chart, if you look along the x-axis, that horizontal axis at the bottom, we're looking at zip codes and the concentration of Black people in it. And so as the concentration of Black people increases, the home prices, which are, as you can see at the top of the bars, decrease. It's very linear. Homes where the share of the Black population is less than 1%, their average listing price is about $340,000 compared to $180,000, where the share of the Black population is 50% or higher. But a lot of people will say that's because of education. That's because of crime. And those are things you can control for in a study. And that's exactly what my colleagues, Jonathan Rothwell and David Harshberger and I did. And so we took that absolute price, what you saw in the earlier slide. And then we controlled for structural characteristics because we wanted to get home prices among the same 2 bedrooms, the same 3 bedrooms, similar structure, similar size. And we used Zillow to get us so we could capture homes with similar square foot quality. And then we controlled for neighborhood amenities, education, crime, walkability, all those fancy Zillow metrics in order to get at an apples to apples comparison between homes in Black neighborhoods and homes in white neighborhoods. And what we found pretty much astounds. Homes in Black neighborhoods are undervalued by 23%, and that's about $48,000 per home. Accumulatively, that's $156 billion in lost equity. Now, the mayors out there know that housing prices are essentially the lifeblood of municipalities. We draw tax revenue from those housing prices. So when you see this devaluation occurring, it should send shivers through your spine. You're losing revenue because homes are underpriced in Black neighborhoods. And this is happening all across the United States. You can see in this map that wherever you see a magenta circle, that is where devaluation is happening all across the United States. The larger the circle, the larger area of devaluation. Where there are green circles, that's Black neighborhoods where home prices are on average higher than white neighborhoods. So there are some places in which home prices are higher in Black neighborhoods. I'll just give you an example here in Dallas-Fort Worth metro, there's a price difference of 28%, about $47,000 per home in that metro area. And you can see here in Lynchburg, Virginia, for instance, 81% price difference. Rochester, New York, 65% difference. Again, I mentioned that there are places where home prices are higher. So Nashville is plus 10%, Wichita Falls, plus 16%. But I want to put that 156 billion in perspective. 156 billion would have financed more than 4.4 million Black-owned businesses based on the average amount Blacks use to start up their firms. It would have paid for more than 8 million four-year degrees based on the average cost of tuition at a public university, four-year university. It would have replaced the pipes in Flint, Michigan nearly 3,000 times over. It's would have covered almost all the damage of Hurricane Katrina, and it's doubled the annual economic burden of the opioid crisis. Now, I brought that up because my father, in writing the book, Know Your Price, I traveled to where he lived, looking at the neighborhoods. And he lived in areas where there was significant housing devaluation. And I'm certain that if he lived in a white neighborhood and happened to be white, he would have had the resources, he would have gone to better schools, because remember, again, that municipalities use a lot of this money for schools. He would have had better infrastructure. He would have had better services, better policing. He probably would not have ended up in prison. He probably could have gone to a drug rehabilitation center instead of a prison, as he should have. And that leads me to this claim, there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. So often we blame Black people for the conditions and state of Black communities and Black neighborhoods. But in reality, a lot of what I displayed to you is a result of policy. Redlining, housing discrimination, reduces the value in homes, to the detriment of individuals and communities. I want to show you, now let's be clear. If there's one area we know that discrimination exists and existed, it's housing. But I want to show you a clip from a hearing that I participated in with the appraisal community. If you've been paying attention to the news, there's been a lot of emphasis on appraisals. My research comes into view in those discussions. But I want to show you a small clip from the hearing in which Representative Al Green on the Financial Services Committee asked the panelists whether or not there's discrimination in the housing market. Take a listen and absorb this.
If you think Black people are being discriminated when their property is being appraised, would you kindly raise your hand? One person on the panel. If you think that, for fear that I'm not communicating well, if you think that Black people are not being discriminated against when their property is being appraised, if you think they're not being discriminated against, kindly raise your hand. Okay, hands now, we're getting some consternation, I see.
Now, clearly, there's discrimination in the housing market, and you don't necessarily have to break rules in order for there to be discrimination. Remember, it was legal to discriminate for most of our history in the United States, and many of those practices are still in play. So I played that clip for you to see that if we deny discrimination, we're only hurting ourselves. That the communities that are burdened with devaluation is losing revenue for everyone. So it's imperative that we at least acknowledge something is going on in the market that reduces value in Black communities. And I'm going to now pivot quickly to business. Because again, most people start their businesses with the equity in their homes. So I'm just going to show how this relates to business. This is Dorian Moorfield, owner of Grandma B's restaurant inside of Pittsburgh's Hill District. It's a Black majority neighborhood. He gets great reviews on Yelp. Yelp is a great tool to measure quality because customer service ratings really do correlate with quality. And so I wanted to pay attention. What's the Yelp ratings of businesses in Black neighborhoods? Now, again, this is a Black majority neighborhood, but in 2010, it was essentially 100% Black. Now it's 80% Black. So it's rapidly gentrifying. But I wanted to get a sense of quality in businesses. So guess what we did? We took business revenue from DMB data, and it also provided us to get a sense of the race of the business owner. We scraped Yelp data from all businesses in the United States to get a sense of business quality and by place. And then we controlled for neighborhood characteristics, similarly to what we did in housing. And we controlled for spending power, education, all those different things. And what we found pretty much falls in line with housing. Black, brown, and Asian businesses in Black neighborhoods, if you don't control for the kind of business, they actually score higher on Yelp than their white counterparts. But when you do control, there's no difference in quality, essentially no difference in quality. But businesses in Black neighborhoods get fewer reviews and are rated lower on average. So you can see in this chart that minority-owned businesses, Black, brown, Asian-owned businesses, they score higher consistently than white businesses. But as the concentration of Blackness in the neighborhood increases, essentially revenues drop because you're getting fewer customers. But I want to be clear, and that's costing businesses on the high end of ratings anywhere between $1 and $4 billion in profits each year. There is a saying in Black neighborhoods, particularly among elders, that spoke to this phenomenon. They used to say, our ice is just as cold. Our ice is just as cold. They knew if you bypass quality in the Black neighborhood, you distort the market in a way in which highly rated businesses are now competing with lowly rated businesses. And that suppresses economic mobility. And so I brought up these issues because when it comes to Black neighborhoods, the assets in them are devalued in spite of their quality. But these should be considered underappreciated assets, meaning if you just add water, it will grow. And so there's a good thing in this story that we've identified these assets are worthy of investment. We just need to recognize them as quality. And so how to counter this? Here are some recommendations, and I will give some broad stroke recommendations. First, you have to invest in people. We have to invest in business owners, homeowners, of the like. We need to move away from investing in programs. Investment, if you don't, and also I'll talk about investment in place. The reason why I lead with invest in people, if you invest in place before people, that actually raises property values, and people can't compete with that. So eventually, if you invest in place over people, you push out people, you displace them. It encourages gentrification. In addition, we must remove unnecessary bureaucratic barriers to entry into entrepreneurs. Again, putting them in some kind of boot camp is really not needed, because what the data show is that Black businesses are as good as white businesses. They don't need special programs They just need investment to grow. Now, we should invest in place. The reason why I brought up the restaurant Grandma B's in Pittsburgh, in that before gentrification started happening, he witnessed that the city was starting to pick up trash more regularly, fixing the lights, doing more beautification in the area. White folks need not move into a Black neighborhood in order to necessitate those kind of investments. And so we've got to make sure that we're investing in the infrastructure in Black neighborhoods, just like we're investing in infrastructure in white neighborhoods. In addition, we need to partner with businesses and developers to incentivize renovation and provide commercial spaces in Black neighborhoods. We got to be deliberate about that. In my book, Know Your Price, I talk about buying back the block and what that means. Now, I have a Valuing Black Assets initiative, and I'll talk briefly about some of the components of this. I'm hoping the mayors are listening and will project this to their entrepreneurial community. Brookings and Ashoka are going to enter into a innovation challenge where we're going to give $1 million worth of prize money to innovators who are working on housing devaluation. So starting in October, you'll hear an announcement, hopefully. You can follow me on Twitter, or you can email me at aperry@brookings.edu to learn more. But we're going to announce this challenge where people from around the country are going to work together on solving for housing devaluation. In addition, I'm working on this project called 1555, and I'll just briefly go through that. We want to elevate national quantifiable goals to invest in Black communities. And we want to incentivize 15% of all Black-owned businesses to grow and hire one additional employee, which would add more than $55 billion to the economy. So the point here is we have too many sole proprietorships that could be employer businesses if we simply invested in them. And so we're setting out national goals to do that. There's more of those solutions in my book, Know Your Price. I just wanted to whet your appetite because we're going to talk a little bit about my presentation next, but you can find a lot of this in my book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black City. So at this point, I'm going to return for our question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Dr. Perry, thank you for that incredible presentation. Getting tons of feedback already about how amazing and instructive this is for folks on the ground. We're getting some questions from the audience, but while those come in, I'm going to dig in and just get right to the weeds. I'm glad you presented your testimony to Congress about the appraisal issue. That is an issue that I think you obviously speak at great lengths about, but is an issue from a policy perspective that I've personally grappled with for a long time. Do you have any examples or any ideas of how we at the local level might approach what is on its face not breaking the law, but clearly vestiges of redlining? How do we change the appraisal issue? How do we engage our private appraisals? How do we engage our lenders who are appraising issues and property at a lower value? What is a policy, either a soft policy or hard policy mechanism we might use to change that?
Well, clearly we need another way for homeowners to dispute an appraisal.
Yep.
Because, and there are processes in place to do that, but they really go to a dead end street. So appraisal, and so you have that. There's also an issue here around the Dodd-Frank rules around creating an arm's length relationship between the lender and the appraiser. Now, there was during the housing crisis, it became clear that lenders were putting pressure on appraisers to appraise them at a certain level wrongly. Now, and that forced them to say, let's create an arm's length. But now there's no conversation. And so the oftentimes deals come back and there's a mismatch between the appraiser and the lender, and the deal falls through. And because blacks don't have the wealth to make up any difference, the deal just falls through. So we need something in that space. And there's one final issue that I'm working on. When it comes to home improvements, for whatever reason, I'll say bias, that home improvements in black neighborhoods are not valued at the same level in white communities. And so those investments don't pay out in the end of the day. So those are three areas that I'm working in earnest. And I have to say the appraisal community recently, because of a bunch of notable news articles, but I also think a genuine concern to address this issue, they've reached out. So we're working on this issue because you're absolutely right. This is not just an appraisal issue. This is revolves real estate agent behavior, lenders, the overall market, but clearly appraisals are the explicit sort of practice that prices the home. So there has to be something done there.
Yeah, I agree. And so two thoughts. One is in Kansas City, we found that there was a really simple fix, which was quiet title. Many black families did not have quiet title to their home, right? Because this third generation was living in the home, but because the grandmother who owned the home outright never got good simple estate planning from a lawyer, there was not quiet title. So there would be a home repair that could have been taken care of with home equity easily. And they weren't able to leverage home equity because, there was no access to very simple, straightforward estate planning. And so there was a program in Kansas City that a large law firm ran where they would do free quiet title, and it's relatively cheap and easy to do. It's just you got to have a program and somebody to kind of gather all the attorneys to do it and go through and do quiet title so those families can access that home equity, that wealth that they do have. So you have black families that have built-in home value equity and they can't access it because, basic access to justice, as we call it from the legal community. And it is a simple policy fix that really doesn't require that much time and serves the entire community.
Absolutely.
And there was another issue too that during the Great Recession, we had loan originators overappraising the homes and giving black and brown families loans to homes and appraising those at very high rates. But when it comes to actual, like you said, Dodd-Frank, then it pulls it back. Now it's swung the other way, and we don't have a fair appraisal. And so it's funny when you see the system wants to operate, they can extract one way or they can extract the other, but technically it's all within the spirit of the law, and it just doesn't matter because the system's going to work the same way no matter what.
And that's why in that video, I do believe the appraisers raised their hand because they were essentially saying, I'm not breaking the law.
Right.
And, and I'm like, wow, but at the end of the day, there's something wrong in the process. And so those points are absolutely right. And some of these, there are low hanging fruits in terms of policy to address this issue. But when it comes to, I can't say this enough, when it comes to entrepreneurialism, home values means so much because most people start their business with home equity.
Yep. And it is the network too. When your network is suffering from the same policy issue, your network doesn't have the equity in the home value either, right? And so it is home equity is the first, and the next one is friends, families, and fools, right? The triple F. That's right. But if none of your network has that either, they can't access it. They don't have the wealth, and so it is an agglomerative effect within your community. We have some questions from the audience that I want to get to. Board member from the city of New Jersey, Connecticut, board member Kumar asks, how can we draft smart legislation so that banks use the average value of all similar homes for collateral for a business loan, and also rates that are not discriminatory? That's a really good question.
Yeah. And I think right now that is actually what Freddie and Fannie are actually. So what they're actually coming up with technological solutions that use data, sort of what we did. We use hundreds of data points to get at a price to get some averages. Now you can do that and actually use those as baselines, as opposed to what the appraiser does. And there's different things you can do with that. Now, obviously, appraisers don't like that because for them, it's one, it could take their job. I mean, when you're talking AI, you're talking about you're losing a job. But two, and this is true, that outside of the sort of where the fire hydrant is, where the restaurants are, how close it is to downtown, all those different things, a human can provide you more nuanced assessments of the property. However, for whatever reason, when it comes to homes in Black neighborhoods and Black homeowners, they use comps that really don't make any sense at all. And that's at the heart of the problem. There's this variance of choice, but to the question, that's actually being worked out right now. People are figuring out other ways to have baselines, to make different types of, I mean, it's not just on the point raised. It's they're figuring out new ways to create different systems.
Is there a place where we can monitor that and send the mayors and local policymakers? Is there like a white paper or a workshop or anywhere, or is this just because you're Dr. Perry and you're in it and you know what's going on, or is there somewhere where we can maybe just stay tuned for that update?
Yeah. Well, actually, the various appraisal lobbies, if you will, we are now working together to create that white paper, because what they have agreed to do is give me additional data so that we can see how much appraisals factor in to that price difference. Because again, it's not just appraisals, but there's a lot there. And so I would say just follow me and go to the Brookings site, sign on to a newsletter. We'll be releasing reports within the year on this very issue, updating the public on change.
Got it. We'll do. Thank you. And we'll make that available here on our site as well. We have another question. Elijah Wooten, the business navigator for the city of Post Lucia, asks, is there a correlation between investor-owned properties in Black communities and devaluation? I'm not entirely sure I understand the context. Maybe you do, but I think maybe this is getting at maybe lack of investor-owned properties, or I think I understand the context. In Kansas City, we had a lot of investor-owned properties, which were series LLCs that were essentially hedge funds bought up a bunch of property and would sit on them, not pay the taxes, wait for potential gentrification to happen because they were speculating on the value of the property, right? And I know that's a shared experience among other cities. I think maybe that's what they're getting at there. If they're not, we're going to answer the question I just made up. So, Dr. Perry, did you?
The valuation because of speculation is, I mean, there's the data suggests that that's a small component of overall devaluation. It's not, I mean, it happens and it's pernicious and it's wrong, but the devaluation is much more insidious and widespread than that activity.
We have a question from Betsy Hodges, the former mayor of Minneapolis. She states, one of the biggest barriers to enacting anti-racist policy is white resistance, including white liberal resistance, which we all have experienced. And if you are a policymaker in a quote-unquote liberal city, you have experienced NIMBYism from the liberal side as much as the conservative side, if not more at times. Do you have thoughts about what cities could or should do to strategize about this resistance starting now?
Well, you know, it goes without saying, a lot of people point to Minneapolis, St. Paul area and their new zoning ordinances. It goes without saying, and this is not a shocker, much of our zoning policy is rooted in racism. It was built to keep Black people out. It was connected to our racial covenants, housing covenants. You know, and so what I think, there are cities all across the country now exploring new zoning ordinances so that they can increase fairness and affordability and density in particular locations. Because I always remind mayors and city councils that municipalities are still the largest landowners in, and they can actually create zoning in ways to develop the kind of communities they want. This is about leadership, and too often there's a, NIMBY crowd out there that dictates policy, and you often have people who take the easy route and give away land and property to developers when they could actually develop more inclusive housing and business zones. And so, to put it plainly, leadership matters. And if we really do want to create a diverse and inclusive community, leaders have to build it in. I mean, and they do have the power. And yes, it is a political risk because people will say, not in my backyard, essentially.
Yep.
But what do we want to be as a country? That's the question.
Yep. And I think that starts at the local level. What we are
That's
has
right.
always
That's
been at the local. Yeah. And it works up from the bottom up, not the top down.
That's right.
I do want to take a moment. We are talking about Black communities, and I think the systems have intentionally been built to focus on Black communities in a way and perpetuate white privilege and white supremacy in other ways. But I do think that the approach we're taking, we have many mayors here who are mayors of, predominantly white or rural communities. But I happen to think that these systems, while not intentionally affecting those communities, still negatively affect those communities. And I think that it might be an ancillary effect, but it is nonetheless the same. Do you see in other communities that are maybe not the geographic economic center of their region, or have been left behind by a similar, so you describe in the 70s, your experience, your family's experience, industry leaving jobs and men being out of work. That's a very similar experience to many white communities they're feeling now since the 80s and the 90s. Is there a policy crossover? Are you seeing similar effects in white communities? And if not, are there, the opioid epidemic? It seems like we are seeing the same thing that happened to Black communities in the 70s and 80s happening in white communities, rural white communities now. And I wonder if there's a corollary or connection, or if there are policy similarities.
Now, there are lots of communities and people who are negatively impacted by anti-Black legislation. Yeah. And let's be clear, rural communities, or I should say any low wealth communities where there's lower levels of wealth are negatively impacted by the phenomenon I described. And so not all white people could take advantage of the redlining and racial covenants policies. And many of those folks are concentrated in rural communities. And so what's always amazing to me is why there's not coalitions between rural communities and Black communities, because in a lot of ways, not all, they're in the same position. And so many of the things that I described, many of the solutions that I described, rural communities need. And so I'm glad you stated that, because as we approach this upcoming election, it's important for everyone to recognize the policies that they need, and not necessarily the tribe that we belong to. I mean, again, low wealth communities. It could be rural, it could be Black, it could be white, it could be Latino. They're suffering right now. Yep. And it's getting worse all over the country, these problems.
Yep. Yeah. I agree. And I've seen so many different communities affected by the same policy that might be intentionally aimed at communities of color, but turns out white supremacy is an extractive position, and it will extract from anyone. Now, it might extract from some communities first, but it's not good for anyone, turns out. Right. And so thank you for that. We have, how much time do we have? We've got some time? We're good? Okay. There's another question here from Kavanaugh Gray, Director of Business Development, Village of Downers Grove. Working in the startup space, it looks as if there are greater all-around resources in other areas that don't always exist in communities of color. when we say we don't need more small business programs, could you provide more clarity as we go forward? And that's a good question.
Yeah, why I say that is a lot of the programs are rooted in this idea that Black people need financial literacy. They need training. No, they need investment. And so when I say that, what I'm saying is they don't need programs any more than white communities, or But when we're talking about Black business owners, they want them to run through some kind of program and not make this an equity investment. I mean, and sometimes that's all it takes. And so for me, it's about direct capital to people. Yes, we do need programs. I think there are lots of good ones out there. But why I say that is that Black communities don't need them any more than white communities need them. And so that was the point of that comment.
Yeah, I always remind people who come up with that, and it's well-intentioned statement, but I say, one, no one demanded that I have a financial literacy course before I bought my home. And two, working in philanthropy, we always try to intentionally, specifically the Kauffman Foundation, we understand that programs are patronizing if there isn't the investment there, right? If you're saying, well, if you ever get money, this is what you should do with it. That is describing from a position of pathology. There is something wrong with you that you need to improve to be worthy of this, as opposed to saying, you are worthy of this and this is going to happen. And now that it's going to happen for sure and you are going to get the investment, here are some ways that you might not have been exposed to. And really, that should be a part of any program, regardless of which community or which person we're talking about. That's just a good idea. It has nothing to do with the person that's going to receive it. Yeah. So I agree. Ruth Jordan, MBE, WBE manager of the city of Charleston. What do you think about opportunity zones? Oh boy, here we go. Opportunity zones. What do you think?
Well, again, I had that slide up there that said invest in people and above place. And these zones have a long history. I mean, this is not the first sort of incentivized tax credit program. There's a long history of this. The ones that have metrics that because I want to think back, empowerment zones actually showed some success because they had metrics that forced us to see how many people were hired from certain communities, who the fund managers are. I mean, there's a lot of metrics that ensure that the investment are actually going to members of disenfranchised communities. And right now, we don't have those regulations. So you're not seeing how this initiative is translating into wealth growth among Black communities. And it actually could accelerate, again, if you don't invest in people and you invest in place, it can accelerate gentrification, displacement. So that's how I approach this. I say I want people to invest in Black communities and in brick and mortar and lots of different things. But if you don't invest in the person, it's and so a lot of these investments are actually not playing out the way we wanted them to, because and to be honest with you, there's no increase. There's not been a noticeable increase in deals. I mean, there's the people who are already investing in Black communities, they're just getting a bigger tax break. I mean, essentially. Yep. And so I've not been a fan, but we can seek to improve that policy by providing those regulations to make it truly uplift Black communities, Black and brown communities.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think just because you're investing next to someone doesn't mean you're investing in them. And we had no problem in mid-century passing policy where the direct investment went into humans and families in the form of FHA, GI Bill. Those went to the person. We were directly investing in the person. But when it comes to Black and brown communities, all of a sudden we have to have a place-based initiative, right? And I've noticed that, like, wait, over here, it goes right to the person. But when we're talking about Black and brown, it obviously has to be in the place because the families aren't worthy or they're not savvy or they don't have. And again, I think we have to have people-based. I do generally agree with the idea of leveraging capital gains tax as a source. Like, I think that's a brilliant move. And I think the creators of the Opportunity Zone expected more due diligence and deliberation on the regulations than what happened. So I think in general, it's a really good idea. Another bite at the apple might be warranted. I do agree that there's no been but-for causation shown in the investments, but there is something there to be said. I just don't think it's quite there yet. So I personally, I agree with it, and I think it has to be people-based. I think place-based is good secondarily, like you said in your presentation, but we got to have a people-based first, or else you get gentrification and displacement, like you said. We have another question from Suresh from City of New Jersey, Connecticut. More investment is good, but how do we increase customer flow into Black and minority-owned businesses, given the shift towards e-commerce? Do you think local digital marketplace infrastructure would help with e-commerce connectivity? That's a really good question.
Oh, very good. Because I talk about buy back the block all the time, and I'm always mindful. We're in the age of Amazon, where people are buying worldwide. But what's also clear is, business corridors are absolutely critical to the overall community development of a neighborhood. There's no question. And there are some services, we know that are local services and goods that need to be located adjacent to neighborhoods. And so for me, this is about smartly building up or buying back the block, developing commercial corridors with a good mix of locally serving businesses and those that we consider export or in tradable sectors. And so it's really about finding that good combination of businesses in a neighborhood. I also talk about, in some distressed areas, there's a number of abandoned municipal buildings that we can use as incubators to help ease the cost of property of business owners. There's lots of things we can do to make it easier to develop commercial corridors. But again, it's about having the right mix of business, because we are in the age of Amazon, and we need to develop the range of businesses that are out there.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, our research shows, research we funded, there is a base level of sort of Main Street sticky entrepreneurship. There are industries, food, music venues, art, beer, distilleries, things that have been particularly adversely affected by COVID, but also require a social element. People will always want to be social. Now, they might buy their commodities from Amazon, but they will always want a place to go and eat and commiserate and get together and consume local. And that layer of local entrepreneurs is the first thing that gets foundationally put it down in a community, and then the high growth export entrepreneurs come in after that, because you've created a community people want to live in. You've created a community that people can attract talent to. And by the way, high growth entrepreneur, we often think of Amazon or tech or Facebook, but it's oftentimes, we define it at the Kauffman Foundation as a company that's doubling its revenue or doubling its employment essentially year over year. That could be a salsa company. That could be, I mean,
Coffee shop. It could be
coffee shop, right? High growth. We conflate high growth with white and tech, and oftentimes it is not. And that is the other thing we need to disabuse ourselves of the pattern matching of the bias of what we think of as high growth, because there's high growth potential everywhere. So I mean, so we have another. Do we have any more questions? I mean, I think we've come to the end of the questions. This has been an incredible session. I appreciate your time so much, and I appreciate your position, and I look forward to following along with all the work that you shared with us. We're going to make that available for the mayors. Do you have any final thoughts or statements or things you want to pass along?
I try to end with the reason why I titled the book "Know Your Price." That it comes from my favorite play in the whole wide world, Two Trains Running, and in the play, the main character, it's by August Wilson, by the way, the great August Wilson. The main character, Memphis, in the play is about to have his property seized through eminent domain by the city of Pittsburgh. And the main character, Memphis, says, the city of Pittsburgh offers him $15,000 for his restaurant. The main character, Memphis, says, I'm not selling my restaurant for $15,000. I know my price. I got my price. I'm paraphrasing. And and he demands it throughout the play. It's a refrain. I got my price. I know my price. There's another character. His name is Hambone. He makes a deal with another proprietor that if he paints a fence, he will get in exchange a ham. He paints a fence, he never gets his ham. So throughout the play, he goes, give me my ham, give me my ham, give me my ham. And we're not sure if he had a mental illness before he made the deal, but he eventually goes mad and actually dies. But there's actually a happy ending. I know people are like, that's pretty depressing. The happy ending is the main character, Memphis, gets $35,000, well above the original offer. And it's assumed that he's getting the market rate or the white rate. Now, the moral of the story is you got to know that you have worth. What my book tries to do is give people the price to stand on. And even if it means going crazy and dying. And so for the mayors and the council folks and everyone else listening, if we want a inclusive society, if we want to see businesses of all types grow, we need to demand it. We need to know our price, what we're willing to stand for. And so this is not easy work. Folks at the Kauffman Foundation know this. The reason why I believe that they are organizing because they need for you to know your price. And to make the decisions and to stand up, even if you go crazy, and I don't want you to die, but we want change. So thank you very much for having me, and let's keep doing this.
Thank you, Andre, and thank you for those inspiring words. I appreciate your time, and we'll be talking soon and working together, I'm sure. Thank you. Wow, what a great session. I love when deep policy discussion and change and inspiration all come together, and Andre Perry's work, Dr. Perry's work exemplifies that. And I hope you all are excited to engage with him and you are revved up and ready to go for the breakout sessions, because I think, again, that's where we can really see change and demand change and do things to help make a difference and make our economy more robust and resilient. And so before we break out into our small groups, I want to welcome Jen Steinfeld back. She's going to speak to some important changes to the implementation to the commitments program, the city innovation ecosystems. Jen, do you want to take it from here?
Hello there. Thank you, Evan. Very nice to be back with the group. And thank you so much to both Philip and to Dr. Perry. I also grew up in Pittsburgh, and it was very foundational to my experience. And certainly if you have any relationship to Pittsburgh, you have relationships to August Wilson's plays. I just want to say one thing, and I promise Wellington team, I'll get back to my prepared remarks, but speaking about the valuation of different types of businesses and all of the things that are not tech that can be innovative. When I worked with the city of Providence, we had a real focus on food-based businesses. And what I always tried to say with the city is we wanted our programming to be as welcoming if you were starting kombucha business as if you were starting a pupusa business. Because I think it's really important that we are always using that racial equity lens and that cultural equity lens. So as Philip noted earlier this morning, cities across the country are becoming much more racially and ethnically diverse. And so addressing that racial income and wealth and opportunity gaps, as Dr. Perry so eloquently spoke about, is absolutely critical to our municipal and national futures. You just simply cannot leave a growing percentage of your population behind and continue to thrive, let alone grow. Kauffman recently did some research that found that the share of entrepreneurs who are Latino has more than doubled between 1996 and 2019. And the share who are white has decreased during that same period. In 2019, a quarter of new entrepreneurs were immigrants, and that's nearly twice the share of immigrant entrepreneurs in 1996. And Black entrepreneurs make up about 10% of all entrepreneurs, but that number has stayed steady through that entire time. So racial equity has always been an implicit part of our vision, our shared vision for a thriving local economy. And we certainly know how important it is for every resident of a city, town, or village to have access to the same opportunities. But the pandemic and the racial uprising and the economic impacts, we heard a lot about this today and yesterday, have really made those differences in access starkly clear. Now, we made a commitment with this program this year to center racial equity, and we challenged all of our program experts to make this a focus of their technical assistance. So hopefully you've noticed this in the work we've done so far. And going forward, we'll be using a racial equity lens to drive our menu of policies, procedures, and programs to implement. And entrepreneurship and small business ownership are both important tools for addressing the racial wealth gap. And we'll be prioritizing strategies that cities can use to help support Black, Indigenous, and people of color entrepreneurs. Over the next few months, we'll be doing research into promising practices to address the racial wealth and opportunity gap. And we already know that supporting entrepreneurs from underrepresented or historically and currently disadvantaged backgrounds requires additional access to targeted capital. And we're looking for creative and promising programs. So we'd all love to hear what's working in your communities. Please let us know what you're trying out and what you're finding as we continue to work together over the coming year. And please make sure that you join us in the breakout rooms in just a couple of minutes to work with your program experts for the next hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen, for that important statement and important focus. Like we've said all morning, we think that this issue is something that will help us achieve systemic change, make our society more closely to what we aspire to, and improve our economic outcomes for everyone. Fairness and equal opportunity are something that permeate our system when we do it right. Right now we're going to break from 11:15 to noon Central Time. Breakouts are at noon Central. We'll begin at noon Central. And then after the breakouts, we will see you back here for the closing ceremony at 1 p.m. Central, where you will have the opportunity to formally commit your city to this work, to your specific program, policy, or practice. And we will celebrate you, and we will record it, and it'll be a great time. So we'll see you all in a little bit. Have a good break, and have a good time at your breakouts. Thank you.